Let's bring the subcommittee to order. Let me first thank you all for being here. I greatly appreciate your participation. Today we welcome our Inspectors General from the Department of Transportation, the Honorable Calvin Scovel, and from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable David Montoya. Our subcommittee looks to the Inspector General's offices to help us, frankly, deal with and conduct critical oversight to ensure that the people's tax dollars are obviously well spent, and those dollars go as far as possible to meet our nation's transportation and housing needs. Obviously, waste, fraud, abuse, misspending of our agency's dollars is not something that we have high tolerance for. When we have concerns regarding the management and effectiveness within both departments, we look to your offices. We look to the work that you all do for the much-needed oversight and guidance through a number of audits and investigations to get those agencies back on track. And we thank you for your invaluable work and efforts, and to ensure that all agencies are working as efficiently and effectively as can possibly be. So again, thanking you for your service and for the invaluable work that we do. We look forward to your testimony as we make the decisions that will be required to put together the THUD bill for fiscal year 2017. With that, let me recognize our ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, for his opening statements. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to join you in welcoming our two witnesses here today, Mr. Scovel and Mr. Montoya. This oversight hearing is an opportunity for us to examine the key management challenges facing the Department of Transportation and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Many of these issues aren't new, but renewed efforts to address them remain critical to the success of the agencies as they seek to meet emerging challenges. HUD's made some progress in modernizing its human capital management, financial governance, and information security systems, but much work remains. IG reports indicate that HUD continues to struggle to accurately forecast and allocate human capital in an efficient manner, and lacks strong internal controls over how it obligates and controls funds. In addition, the IG has highlighted major concerns about HUD's legacy IT systems and lack of compliance with the Federal Information Security Management Act, which could place large amounts of extremely sensitive personal information at risk. At the Department of Transportation, the IG has identified several priorities for improvement, including the adoption of better acquisition and procurement practices in the development and deployment of next-gen, mitigating the threat to public safety posed by the transportation of hazardous materials, including crude oil and liquefied natural gas, and removing high-risk motor carriers from the nation's roads. Finally, some challenges are common to both DOT and HUD, such as developing and sustaining an effective workforce and addressing the broad array of cybersecurity challenges that pose problems for the federal government as a whole. Oversight is a key function of Congress, but it's especially integral to the work of the Appropriations Committee. Making our funding decisions in close conjunction with vigilant oversight ensures that limited federal dollars are spent wisely. I look forward to learning more about how HUD and DOT are meeting their management challenges and where they stand to improve. Thanks, both of you, for being here today. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, sir. And with that, we will, excuse me? Yes, and with that, we'd welcome your opening statements, and obviously anything else we would also later submit to the record. So thank you very much, and you're recognized, gentlemen. Who wants to start? I should look at my notes, but I haven't had a chance to. Who? Okay. Mr. Scovel, would you care to start with your opening statement then?
Yes, I would.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Diaz-Balart, Ranking Member Price, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify on DOT's top management challenges for 2016. Addressing these challenges is essential to getting the most from the more than $70 billion DOT spends each year across a range of transportation programs. My testimony focuses on three critical areas: safety, stewardship, and IT security. The Department, FAA, and industry continue to maintain one of the world's safest aviation systems, but the introduction of unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, creates one of the most significant safety challenges in decades. FAA has approved more than 3,800 commercial UAS to operate in our airspace, and the number of operators is certain to increase once FAA publishes a final rule for small UAS this year. However, FAA has yet to establish standard procedures or training for air traffic controllers to track and classify the severity of UAS incidents. Improving highway safety also continues to be a challenge. In 2015, we made 17 recommendations to enhance NHTSA's ability to remove unsafe vehicles from roads. This includes collecting and analyzing more comprehensive vehicle safety data. While NHTSA has taken steps to strengthen its defect investigations, the agency must now effectively implement its planned improvements to ensure automakers promptly identify defects and recall affected vehicles. Unsafe commercial drivers further threaten the safety of our highways, particularly those who repeatedly violate medical, drug, and alcohol testing requirements and other safety regulations. Of the 272 motor carrier safety cases that OIG's criminal investigators have initiated since 2008, 14% involved carriers that were banned from the roads for safety violations but continued to operate under a new business name. With regard to stewardship, DOT has opportunities to improve oversight of its investments and assets. For example, we recently reported that FAA awarded a new $727 million contract for controller training without first addressing long-standing issues that we identified in its prior controller training contract, issues that resulted in millions of dollars in cost overruns. Similarly, last year we reported FTA had not fully implemented the required processes and internal controls to award and monitor $10 billion in grant funds allotted for Hurricane Sandy relief. Strong risk-based oversight, financial controls, and planning are vital to eliminating fraud and maximizing federal investments. Sustaining a skilled workforce, DOT's most important asset, also remains a key challenge, particularly as workforce demographics change. For example, 22% of DOT's acquisition workforce, not counting FAA, was retirement eligible last year. From air traffic controllers to FAA oversight personnel to vehicle defect analysts, DOT must identify how many staff it needs in these positions and ensure its training programs keep pace with changing technology. Finally, with regard to IT security, DOT has made major progress in implementing the required use of PIV cards for all employees and contractors. This is a key step in securing access to facilities and systems. However, DOT has been slow to address long-standing cybersecurity weaknesses, such as the lack of effective systems to continuously monitor for threats. The September 2014 fire at a Chicago air traffic control facility also demonstrated the importance of effective contingency planning. Damage from that fire crippled the facility and its systems for 2 weeks, significantly impacting passengers and airlines. Earlier this month, we reported that 5 of the department's 12 operating administrations were not effectively testing or meeting all requirements for their disaster recovery plans. The Department has consistently demonstrated its commitment to addressing these challenges, but effective management and follow-through remain imperative. My office will continue to assist the Department as it works to meet these goals. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I'm happy to answer any questions you or other subcommittee members may have.
Thank you very much, sir. And obviously, any other parts of the statement will be included for the record. And as I said before, we thank you for the job that you are doing. And with that, now we recognize the HUD's Inspector General, Mr. Montoya, for your opening statement. And as I mentioned before, obviously, your full statement will be included in the record. So you're recognized, sir.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you, sir. Chairman Diaz-Balart, Ranking Member Price, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Housing and Urban Development's top management and performance challenges and our oversight of HUD's programs and operations. In 2015, our audits and reviews resulted in nearly $2 billion in recommendations that funds be put to better use, over $2 billion in questioned costs, and nearly $500 million in collections. Our investigative efforts also led to nearly $670 million in restitution, judgment, recoveries, and receivables. When you add in our civil recoveries and receivables, our total results are close to $6 billion. Our mission to promote economy and efficiency and effectiveness in the department's programs and operations has determined that achieving HUD's mission continues to be an ambitious challenge for its limited staff, given its diverse programs, the thousands of intermediaries assisting the department, and the millions of beneficiaries of its housing and development programs. Proposed new and program changes have introduced new risks, oversight, and enforcement challenges. In October 2016, my office reported on 9 key management and performance challenges facing HUD in 2016 and beyond. Our work has noted that these challenges are so interrelated and interconnected, one impacts another to such a degree that in many cases, the department will not be able to remedy one without first addressing or correcting another. This becomes a taxing challenge to determine which needs to come first, or whether several need to be accomplished simultaneously. A common thread underlying many of these management performance challenges is the lack of a cohesive department-wide approach to enforcement, risk management, monitoring, and follow-through on our findings. While HUD is starting to make some changes in certain programs to correct this, we will continue to stress department-wide risk monitoring approach that is data-driven and supports taking appropriate actions when warranted. I want to draw your attention to 2 issues that are of serious concern to my office. The first is that the national credit and financial crisis continues to have a profound impact on departmental operations. HUD is an important component of the nation's housing industry, and that FHA-insured mortgages finance approximately 1/4 of all home purchases in the United States. As such, FHA's portfolio now exceeds $1 trillion. Over the past 5 years, Ginnie Mae has seen its outstanding mortgage-backed securities increase by more than 50% and has experienced its fastest growth in the last 6 years. As of August 2015, Ginnie Mae's mortgage-backed securities portfolio exceeded $1.6 trillion and is estimated to reach the $2 trillion mark in a little over a year. We remain concerned that increases in demand on the FHA's program are having collateral implications for the integrity of Ginnie Mae's mortgage-backed securities program, including the potential for increases in fraud. Secondly, the department's information technology enterprise and security posture exposes it to a serious potential for a breach or failure. For example, HUD's Tenant Rental Assistance Certification System, also known as TRACS, satisfies an important role in HUD's multifamily housing program. It accounts for 78% of all HUD's housing subsidy processing. Of that 78%, 50% are voucher payments within multifamily housing, and the other 50% are Section 8. For nearly 7 years now, the TRACS Program Office has requested funding to upgrade critical systems and components with no funding coming. According to the Program Office's impact assessment, and I will quote, TRACS has no vendor support agreement. Therefore, when the old system catastrophically fails, there is no means to manage housing's rental assistance programs and or pay subsidy payments of approximately $9.8 billion annually. Like these examples, we will continue to build on the successes of the last number of years and ensure our work provides the means to keep the Secretary and the Congress fully and currently informed about the Department's problems and deficiencies, while also highlighting best practices. I want to acknowledge that I have regular meetings with Secretary Castro and Deputy Secretary Coloretti on HUD's management and performance challenges, and that we have seen their efforts to address them. I will stress that their continued interest and focus is paramount to ensuring HUD can correct their longstanding issues. My office is strongly committed to working with the Department and the Congress to ensure that these important programs operate efficiently, effectively, and as intended for the benefit of those most in need now and into the future. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Members, we have obviously a lot of ground to cover, and we all know that there's going to be a lot of questions, and frankly, we're really looking forward to a lot of answers from you all. We're going to proceed as we always do in the standard 5-minute rounds, alternating sides, and again, recognizing members in order of seniority as seated when we began the hearing, and obviously it's both questions and answers have to be within that 5-minute time span. With that, let me begin, and let me begin with you, Inspector Montoya. In 2015, your office has had to express yet another disclaimer on HUD's consolidated financial statements. This is becoming, frankly, a really frightening pattern, especially for a financial institution as large and as important as HUD. I asked the Secretary in a hearing to explain this issue just last week, and he believes the agency is making good progress. Now, I remain, however, very concerned about these audit problems. So let me pose the same kind of question that I posed to him, sir, which is, as simply as you can you just try to explain what's going on with HUD's financials?
Well, it boils down to, well, let me start by saying, yes, I believe the secretary and the deputy secretary are doing all they can to rectify the problem, but it really boils down to a lack of financial management governance. A lot of that is driven by the fact that their human capital management program can't seem to hire people fast enough, right, through the process, and that's how one management challenge impacts another, which is the financial management governance issue. And just a lack of real financial management governance with relates to, for example, policies, procedures, knowing exactly how to run an accounting system. Too often, the CIO in the office isn't really privy to what the program is doing. It almost sort of feels like the program is running their program however they see necessary without regard to accounting principles, right? I guess the best example I can give you is they had a gentleman that was the CIO, was doing probably a better job than we had seen in quite some time, and the gentleman has passed away. But that has been some time, and there has been a lack to quickly fill that CIO position. The deputy CIO, unfortunately, does not have a financial background. He is an IT specialist background. So even at the highest levels of the department, you don't have the people with the financial accounting backgrounds that are needed to drive the financial management governance issues in the department.
That's not exactly a vote of confidence and something that makes me feel too much better. Other way, and let me go to try to get your perspective on HUD's progress as far as addressing its audit problems. In your opinion, are things at least moving in the right direction, and how would you characterize HUD's compliance with your recommendations? You talked a little bit about at the beginning, and requests for information.
So I think it is getting better with regards to following our audit recommendations. I can tell you the Deputy Secretary is intimately involved in not only the recommendations we made, but certainly where we have disputes with the program offices on what should or shouldn't be the recommendation following in the management decision. So I will give them credit for that. Unfortunately, they're often too slow with implementing the recommendations that we offer, sometimes taking years just to implement it. It's in draft, it'll get out, it's being considered, but nothing ever seems to happen fast enough, quite frankly, for it to, in my opinion, make immediate difference. So there's a concern with that. With regards to access, it's been pretty good except for one occasion, and it relates to the deputy CFO, who again doesn't have an understanding of financial management and accounting issues. We do a congressionally mandated audit every year on the credit card program of the department, and they flat out denied us the access to the credit card system so that we could see what type of abuse or misuse was happening with the credit cards. I took it to the highest levels of the department, and we never got clearance. Wow. The denial came from the deputy CIO. We tried to explain to him this is a congressionally mandated audit.
That still remains to this day? Or were you able to, frankly, break that door down?
Well, we never broke the door down. We went through the window, quite frankly. So we went through it by another means to get the information. So it still stands that the department has refused us access to that. I throw that at the feet of the deputy CIO, who again just doesn't have an appreciation for accounting principles and just the need for doing something that basic, quite frankly. It's unfortunate. That's the one issue that is still stuck with me, quite frankly. All other issues we have managed to find an agreed way of getting to the information. Sometimes too slow for my taste, but we get there.
And again, but that's not a small issue you've just brought up.
No, sir, I would not consider it a small issue.
My time is about to run out. I have a number of different questions, and hopefully we'll get to, and we should be able to get to additional rounds. Mr. Price, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask both of our witnesses to address issues of hiring and staffing, which you've alluded to briefly, and I'd like you to elaborate. Both agencies have large numbers of employees eligible for retirement. HUD has a large number of employees with more than 20 years of service. DOT has many retirement-eligible air traffic controllers, as we're all familiar with, as well as safety inspectors approaching retirement. So could you describe the findings from the analysis you've undertaken in this area, first of all, the scope of the problem and the areas within the department where it's a particular problem? It's concentrated more in some places than others, but it is a problem across government. I realize that. And so I wonder, are there government-wide best practices to address this question that you are drawing on, or that you feel the departments should draw on. Do anticipated retirement patterns influence the training and skills development plan at your agency? Certainly they should. To what extent has that been accommodated? What action should the agencies be taking to plan for retirements? We'll start with you, Mr. Montoya.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Mr. Price. I can tell you that as best we can tell, more than 43% of HUD's career staff are eligible to retire, I think as of 2014, quite frankly. So you're at almost a 50% mark of those that can retire. There have been a number of human capital studies done for the department, not only by us, GAO, NAPA, and invariably the department continues to be challenged to effectively manage its limited staff and hire the right people, and sometimes to the detriment of itself. One good example that I could probably give you is in the area of GNMA, where, when you're operating in financial markets, you need to be able to move quickly. In one particular case, they have yet to hire a particular finance-type background person, so instead they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to a contractor to fill that role, as opposed to trying to hire somebody to get in to do that job. So from the standpoint of you're using limited tax dollars, if you will, to pay high prices for contractors to do something a career person should do. It's the same issue we see in the IT arena. Much of the career staff has been lost, and it's really contractors doing the job. While the CIO who is there is doing, I think, a phenomenal job, and since his arrival about a year and a half ago, he's strapped with himself trying to hire the right skill sets. I think he's got something on the order of 11 key positions that are still lacking for him to help him do the IT role. It's a consistent problem through government. I'm not quite sure how I could put my finger on what exactly the hiccup is for the department. I think they're feeling that going to a shared services environment will help them, but even in that world, you still have to have career staff within your own department that can help shepherd through the shared services environment what you need.
Much of that could be elaborated, but let me turn to Mr. Scovel, and we may return to the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Price. I appreciate the question, too. Unlike HUD, my office has not undertaken a department-wide review of retirement eligibility for all DOT employees. But what we have done instead has been to focus on the most critical parts of the DOT workforce. The acquisition workforce across the department. We've looked at NHTSA's Office of Defects and Investigations workforce. We've looked at air traffic controllers. We've also taken a look at the acquisition workforce strategy for FAA's own acquisition workforce. In each case, each of those entities has correctly identified retirement eligibility as a looming problem, but we don't see a surge or a bow wave of imminent retirements such as to cripple the critical functions, especially on the safety side of the Department of Transportation. For air traffic controllers, it's not a secret that the number of air traffic controllers who were hired after the strike in 1981 are now approaching retirement. Many have already walked out the door. The department, the FAA, has had a concentrated effort to backfill those as they go out year after year. And until about 2012, FAA was largely successful in keeping pace with new hires with departures. In 2012 and 2013, sequestration kind of put the bottom out of that effort. Consequently, in 2014, the agency embarked on a new hiring strategy, which resulted in fewer new hires being brought on board. So there's a widening gap between the hiring plans or intentions of FAA for air traffic controllers and what they've actually been able to bring on. I do want to say, however, that we don't see a nationwide shortage of air traffic controllers. There are 14,000 plus at the end of fiscal year 2015. We think that's enough across the entire air traffic control system, but where we have seen gaps is at critical air traffic control facilities, and we published a report recently that identified the 23 most critical facilities and where there have been gaps in staffing, some of which undoubtedly have been due to departures, resignations, retirements, and what have you. On the acquisition side, we've identified for the department as I mentioned, a 22% retirement eligibility across the entire department, minus FAA. That is most concerning because the department's acquisition workforce has struggled to keep pace with the volume and the complexity of the systems and programs that it's responsible for.
Thank you. We're going to have to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Jolly, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to each of you for being here. I wanted to follow up, Mr. Montoya, with your conversation about being denied access to the credit cards. What's the scale here? How many transactions? How much in dollar amount or numbers of transactions were you seeking access to?
Or we wanted to seek access to the entire system for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted to be able to decide, statistically speaking, how many records we would look at, right? We also wanted to see whether the department had availed itself of all the options that the credit card company offers for security, those sorts of things. So it would have been too easy for us to say to the department, give us X percent of records that we can look, just, a random sampling. We wouldn't have been able to get into the rest of it. What buttons have they put up for security purposes?
And it was the deputy CIO who denied access?
That's correct.
That's Mr. Cook? Is that?
No, it is Mr. Hungate, Joseph Hungate.
And what was the rationale? What was the reason?
I think he felt that it was unnecessary, that it would be a fishing expedition. We tried to tell him, this is a congressionally mandated audit. You can look at what exactly Congress is looking for. It's not like we just decided to come in and audit. I think just a complete misunderstanding of, again, his role, that he should be playing as the Deputy Chief Financial Officer.
And your recourse then internally is what, as the IG?
Well, I took it to the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary, and nothing came of it, so we went to the contractor directly and got access to the contractor.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. We dealt with a similar issue with this just last year with DOJ as well.
Yes, sir.
With the denial. So thank you for that. You also mentioned in your oral statement a pretty damning evaluation, if you will. You said lack of departmental approach to enforcement, to risk monitoring. You mentioned to the chairman, slow to respond to concerns. I mean, those are some pretty significant opinions, particularly given some of the failings that we have seen and then the failure to respond to some issues.
Yes, sir.
It appears to me that, that kind of starts at the top, the culture of the department. Somehow, the secretary has to accept some type of responsibility for that evaluation that you provide.
I don't disagree. I can tell you, though, that this secretary, since the day he arrived, heeded my concerns. Many of these issues that I'm talking about predate him. And
so you have seen improvement under...
I have seen improvement, and I will give him credit for doing a joint, for putting out a joint letter with the two of us, where we were talking to all staff about the importance of cooperating with the IG. So the issues I bring up aren't necessarily at his feet, although I think he's trying to change the culture. He actually did an on-camera video for the whistleblower training that we were providing the department, where he talked about the importance of whistleblowers and, no retaliation will be tolerated, these sorts of things. So I give him credit for that. Many of these things are the career people or people well below him. And to change a culture is going to take longer than the year and a half he's been there. I will give him credit for that.
And I'm sorry, I gotta cut you off. I have one more quick question, then I have something for Mr. Scovel. But Mr. Montoya, your budget request is an increase of about $3 million or so over last year.
Yes,
Is there any delta that you feel like there's something really off the table? I know you stand by your budget request, but there could always be more, but do you have any heartburn over what's not in your budget request?
There could always be more. I think what I would let you know is I think, overseeing two financial institutions almost worth $3 trillion is an important facet of what we do, as is the security, IT security of the system with the millions of records that they maintain.
Okay. Mr. Scovel, a question for you, and look, this is going to be put you on a tough spot. I asked the secretary about the allocation of competitively awarded Tiger grants and the fact that a certain percentage were going to Democratic districts as opposed to Republican. Numbers can be numbers. He pushed back a little bit. I understand that. But he said something in his testimony that was quite alarming, in my opinion. So the largest single state Tiger grant award went to Charlotte. And he acknowledged that he played a hand in consideration of that award. His testimony to this committee was that he was involved in every single award. I was more concerned about the allocation, you know, almost 2/3 or whatever the number is going to Democrats and a third going to Republicans. Set that aside for a moment. Is it appropriate, in your opinion, for the Secretary to be personally involved in competitive Tiger Grants award, particularly when the largest is going to his home city?
Thank you, Mr. Jolly. I'd look, and we have looked, although not recently. Our last Tiger Grant study was in 2012, and at that time, we and GAO looked at the process by which the department was using. And that's where our focus would be. What were the measurable factors considered by, in this case, the Secretary and his entire staff in making these discretionary grants?
Are secretaries typically personally involved in competitive award decisions like that?
I can only limit my answer to what I must limit my answer to what I've seen at the Department of Transportation. And for Tiger specifically, yes, I know Secretary LaHood was, as is Secretary Fox too.
Okay.
Given the unique nature of the program and the high visibility of the discretionary nature of it, in my view, it's appropriate for the Secretary to be that much involved. Okay. However, I would also recommend to the committee, as I would to the Secretary if I were to speak to him on this subject, that the process and the measurable factors to be considered need to be ironclad.
Okay. I'll have a follow-up. Thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Mr. Cuellar.
Mr. Scovel, again, just to make sure, because I'm one of those Democrats that didn't get any of those Tiger Grants, but I do want to put it for the records that we don't want to give the impression that Secretary Fox is the only one doing this. Republicans have done it, like Hood was a Republican, and I'm sure that other folks have done this. So this is nothing new that a Democrat is doing. Is that correct?
It is nothing new. The Tiger program, Mr. Cuellar, is fairly new within the department. It was instituted, as the committee remembers, in the aftermath of the Recovery Act. It's attracted a lot of attention and a lot of energy throughout the department, and we're now in the 8th round, and $5 billion have been allocated through this system. The department has a pretty robust effort underway to vet and clean up as many applications as they can each round.
Thank you. Let me ask both of you. I'll start off with Mr. Montoya from El Paso, Texas, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Let's talk about the Improper Payment Eliminations Recovery Act of 2010. I've added language already in other appropriation bills about improper payments. There's some of them that have just gone to huge amounts, billions of dollars. Usually what members of Congress, what we set up is we add in, set a goal, report back to Congress. If we would add some language that would say, at least eliminate improper payments by 10% per year, would that be a reasonable number? I know that I believe the goal for HUD was 3.8, I think, or something like that, somewhere. So if we put a higher threshold, we put 10%, actually telling HUD and the Department of Transportation on their improper payments. Would that be something reasonable that they could accomplish? And Mr. Chairman, the reason I'm asking that is we know there's the improper payments, and I think the problem is, like, for example, HUD, they're talking about, having out-of-date information and those type of billing errors. Would 10% be reasonable? And I'll ask both of you gentlemen that question. And if you want to take Mr. Montoya the first, and then Mr. Scovel after that.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar, for the question. It's difficult for me to say, sir. I can tell you that previously their percentage was a lot higher. When they didn't meet it, they decided to lower it to make it something they could reach, and they did reach it this last year. But they're still into the $1 billion mark when you talk about improper payments. The concern I have as an IG is I think I'm one of the only IGs who doesn't do the investigative work on IPA within the department. The department does its own investigations on violations of improper payments. And it looked like they did reduce it from $5 billion to $1.2 billion over the last 8 to 10 years. So they've made definitely some significant recovery. But still.
But even the last 10 years, that means we paid billions of dollars
Yes, sir.
of improper payments.
Right.
And the reason I'm saying it, and I'm glad they done that, but what are we supposed to do as the oversight, provide oversight through the appropriations when we see agencies that are just every year they're paying billions of dollars of improper payments? What, if you were sitting over here, what sort of language would you put in if there's anything possible that, we could add?
Well, it goes
And
back to.
again, both of y'all.
I beg your pardon. It goes back to something I said, and that's this lack of enterprise approach to what's going on in the department. It's too siloed. It's sort of every silo for himself. There's not this enterprise approach to really what's going on. How can we get a handle on improper payments from an enterprise-wide perspective as opposed to just each program doing its own thing? It's certainly something I could think about and get back to you, sir. I don't know that I've got an answer for you at this point in time, though.
Well, appreciate any language on that. And Mr. Scovel, and then I think my time will be up. But Mr. Chairman, there's other committees that do the same. Other agencies. It's just a huge problem to the taxpayers in the billions of dollars. But Mr. Scovel, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Cuellar. You're right. It is a huge problem at the Department of Transportation. It is a problem and remains a problem despite the department's best efforts. Our focus from the OIG has been on examining the system of internal controls that several of our most financially well-endowed administrations are responsible for, particularly with regard to FTA and federal highways, because both of them operate more with grants than they do with procurements or contracting themselves. And as the committee knows, once a grantee has been approved, the grantee for a particular project, that grantee may draw down on its own from funds that the department has custody of. The level of oversight in that drawdown process is absolutely critical. Both highways and FTA have control mechanisms in place, but frankly, when we've looked at them, they haven't been wholly sufficient. And over time and many reports, we have tried to recommend improvements in those controls.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I would just ask the chairman and the ranking member that if you notice, they said there was a higher number, so they didn't meet it. So, okay, let's make them look better. So well, not y'all, but let's lower the amount because they couldn't meet it. I would love to work with y'all on improper payments because I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers when we're talking about billions of dollars every year. But anyway, thank you for the good work. Appreciate it.
Again, well stated, Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Young, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Montoya, gentlemen, welcome today. In your testimony, Mr. Montoya, you reference an audit that showed over 25,000 families living in public housing exceeded HUD's income limits. In your testimony, quote, you say, quote, this was exacerbated by the public housing agency's lack of desire to address these issues themselves, unquote. When you say lack of desire, can you elaborate on that? Is that they just don't want to do it? There's incompetence there? They've got a policy difference? Can you just elaborate on what lack of desire means?
Yes, sir, and thank you for the question. What we've seen on the over income, and what I want to make sure we're clear on is these public housing authorities have had the authority since at least 2004 to remove those high income earners from public housing. Often we've heard that the reason they haven't done it is because to do that takes away from the additional rent that they're able to make off the higher salaried families. So that's one issue. So it's a choice. The other thing we've heard is they don't believe that they have the authority to do so, although we feel that they do. It also boils down to just a lack of knowledge and experience by either the public housing director, the staff, the boards, to understand what their roles, responsibilities, and what the regulations say. So it's a number of those different issues.
So you feel that they have the authority?
Yes, sir, we do.
They feel that they don't have the authority?
That's correct.
So it's just going to be another stalemate? I mean, what happens?
Well, the department right now is going through a notice of proposed rulemaking to determine what that balance would be for significantly over income households and what timeline would be considered for removal from public housing. So I think there is an effort to make it more clear that they do have the authority, and to create a regulation or a law that says, you know, you will do this when these sort of things are met.
Regarding the status of HUD's financial records, this is very disturbing. I think we can agree without adequate funding of HUD's finances, smart decisions on spending and identifying areas of waste and duplication become nearly impossible. How can we be an effective oversight committee, as well as appropriations committee, if we can't see what the heck is going on here with their finances? And do you have any confidence their books can become auditable? And are there some general accounting principles that they adhere to that you know of at all? Because it's making your life really difficult to figure this out. And then that doesn't help us.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I want to give all the credit to my financial audit division. They do a phenomenal job, highly trained individuals and very dedicated, but we've been putting them through their paces. It's going to be a number of years before HUD gets their books in order to such a degree that they can come out of a disclaimer. It is my belief. I believe that the department, with the assistance of Congress, has to have the ability to hire the skill sets they need. And I'll give you an example. With regards to Ginnie Mae, there's at least 30 positions that we estimate that really should have a salary range that's greater than the general schedule, because what you're competing against is people in the financial market and in the financial world. And we really just can't compete with hiring those highly specialized skill sets to operate in a very fluid financial market when you're only offering GS scale. In fact, I can tell you just recently, they lost 2 of their key staff accounting auditing people to the Federal Housing Finance Agency because they do pay higher salary ranges. So we're always going to bump against that unless Congress and the department get to a point where they can agree, okay, not everybody in Ginnie Mae, but at least 30 key positions should be higher salaried. And the reason I say that is just recently they had to do a restatement of the financial audits we had just done because they were able to determine $1.9 billion had been misstated. Now, that's quite a bit of money to have misstated. So these are the concerns that we continue to experience. I don't think we'll get out of disclaimer this year from what we've seen. And it's not just Ginnie Mae, it's again how the programs run their programs. You know, the idea that PIH had this first in, first out methodology of how they were going to account for funding was the other reason that we gave them a disclaimer. So a number of issues there that all boil down to human capital and the ability to hire the right people quickly.
You say it could take a number of years for them to get their books under control. Do you want to pontificate as to, is that 3 or 13 or 30 years?
I couldn't give you a number. I can tell you that right now, with regards to what the department is doing with their accounting on this FIFO prospectively, but not retroactively, so we're going to have to wait. If they don't do it retroactively as well, we're going to have to wait for all that to kind of make its way through the pipeline before we get to a clean set of books. I couldn't fathom a guess. I would hope before the next administration after the one that will be elected this November.
Thank you for your testimony and for being here, both of you gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And again, we have a lot of questions. Before I go to Mr. Scovel, let me follow up with you, Mr. Montoya. You raised a lot of issues now, but also in your written testimony, you mentioned how long things take. And I will tell you, however, I was shocked and discouraged to read that you mentioned in your testimony since 1991, OIG has reported on the lack of an integrated financial management system. You mentioned that also later. I mean, that's a quarter of a century. And here we're still trying to figure out, why we can't get HUD and their accounts for its funds in a timely or accurate manner. I mean, they simply can't even answer how many FTEs they have on board right now. And so here's the question. I mean, how do we get HUD? And I mean all of HUD, and you mentioned about how it's siloed, right? All of HUD to get off the dime and take this, what is pretty much a basic responsibility, seriously. And I don't have to tell you that if we don't, HUD will never be able to mitigate, be a responsible financial management platform, to create one or deal with one when you mentioned the risk of that and retire those old spreadsheets and that legacy system. So again, how do we get HUD to get off the dime and take this very basic responsibility seriously? And, what's the answer here? Because again, it's, you mentioned about your frustration about how long it takes. Now, this issue here is now, we're talking about a quarter of a century.
Yes, sir, and I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's just the culture that was created at HUD where fiefdoms and silos and programs ran on their own without regard to the larger organization. So I can tell you that I think Deputy Secretary Coloretti and the Secretary understand the enterprise risk approach. There is some movement finally with regards to enterprise views of things. We've seen that. It's very encouraging to me. But you're talking about a very well-entrenched long-term culture that needs to be changed, and unfortunately, there'll be an administration change here very shortly, in whatever momentum this
Back to
secretary
potentially square one, right?
is absolutely going to go back. It's going to be like that void. Everything's just going to retract quickly, and that concerns me.
Let me now turn to you, Mr. Inspector Scovel. One of the most important functions performed by DOT is identifying defective vehicles and things like that. You mentioned that in your testimony, hopefully recalling them before folks are injured. And, you know, we recalled the hundreds of injuries and deaths linked to the GE General Motors ignition switch failure, which really kind of demonstrates why this capability is frankly so crucial, right? I mean, you're literally dealing with folks, potentially people's lives. In 2011, you audited DOT's Office of Defects Investigation, and you talked about that a little while ago. And then last year, in the wake of GM's recall, and you conducted a second audit. Now, looking at these two audits together, what are the key findings? What are the key findings about DOT's defects investigation capabilities? And what should be the top priority to try to improve that obviously very important capability?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My office has done some groundbreaking work when it comes to NHTSA's Office of Defects Investigations and their important efforts to ensure motor vehicle safety for American travelers. You're right. In 2011, about the time of the Toyota sudden unintended acceleration debacle, our office was asked by then Secretary LaHood to take a look at NHTSA ODI and examine a number of specific aspects of their operation. We did that. We made a series of recommendations which we were able to close after assuring ourselves that the proposed actions by NHTSA to fix the problems that we identified in ODI were in place. In 2014, Secretary Fox asked us to take another look at ODI. This was in the aftermath of the GM ignition switch problem that you mentioned. We did that. This time we looked at the pre-investigations actions or activities of ODI, and we found significant deficiencies to the tune of 17 recommendations. But also in conjunction with this latest effort, we went back, frankly, because ODIs, we thought some of the problems that we had identified in 2011, if the fixes that we had recommended had been properly implemented, they shouldn't have come back. But we went back again to look at the implementation of our 2011 recommendations. And what we found was disturbing. It was while the actions proposed by the agencies had been sufficient in our view at the time, the quality of implementation, the consistency of the implementation had been sorely lacking. And a couple of key examples, one fairly major and one fairly minor. We recommended a detailed training program be established for key positions within the Office of Defects Investigation. We got the paperwork back, and it looked okay to us at the time to ensure that that is what would happen going forward. When we went back to check on whether that had actually been implemented, it had not. And that was a finding in one of our follow-up recommendations, follow-up audits from last year. A more minor recommendation or finding that we made, looking back again to our 2011 report, was taking care of business, taking care of the paperwork within ODI. We had found that reasons for the agency to have delayed in making key findings, safety findings with regard to possibly defective vehicles weren't being documented. As a result, agency leadership didn't know, the public didn't know what the status was of a particular investigation and why it was taking so long. So we simply recommended document the reasons for the delay. They presented us a plan of action that indicated it would take place. When we went back and double-checked, we found that it had not been taking place in 70% of the time. And we were looking simply for 90% sufficiency, and that would have satisfied us as to consistency of application. We found instead 30% application. So significant shortcomings across the line.
It's very troubling, by the way.
It is.
Very troubling.
I can tell you that we have the attention of NHTSA, and Secretary Fox's attention is still on ODI. I do wish to give the department and the agency credit in that regard. In fact, I have met several times personally with the administrator. I know that his key program people from ODI are continue to meet a couple times a month now with my audit team, because they are focused, as the saying goes, like lasers, to try to make a June 30th target action date to close off our latest set of recommendations.
Well, let me then interrupt you on that bit of good news, I guess, high note, to recognize Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scovel, let me first return to a matter that was raised earlier, and then I want to follow up on another matter with Mr. Montoya. But insinuations were made earlier regarding the Tiger program, and I want to just give you a chance to respond here. I want to confirm, I suppose, that you've never found evidence of improper procedures or any kind of partisan screening of applications in the Tiger program?
Mr. Price, we haven't looked for partisan activities regarding screening. I can tell you a major finding from our 2012 report was at the tail end of Tiger projects. What were the performance measures that the department was able to identify and require of grantees, and how would those be aggregated or rolled up into an overall evaluation of the success of the Tiger program? That's a recommendation that's still outstanding for us. We haven't been able to find evidence that the department has succeeded on that one yet.
Have you ever found improper or unusual intervention in the decision process by either Secretary LaHood or Secretary Fox?
We have not conducted a study under Secretary Fox. Our first 2012 report was with then Secretary LaHood. At that time, we recommended process improvements, but we found no evidence, as you put it earlier, of partisan involvement or motivation.
Is there any reason that the Secretary, by virtue of Charlotte, North Carolina being his hometown, should rule out the possibility of any kind of Tiger grant to that formal law or procedure that would suggest that that Charlotte should be ruled out by virtue of the Secretary's hometown?
I'm not aware of law or procedure that might lead the Secretary to recuse himself or to sit out a decision on a Charlotte application, for instance. I can say, however, that in the exercise of good judgment and prudence, might a deciding official be concerned with perceptions? Of course. Such decisions and actions had been considered in the past, then he might proceed.
Right.
I do have to say, again, Mr. Price, we haven't looked at the Tiger Grant program specifically since 2012.
And so you have no information about recusal or anything else with respect to the Charlotte decision?
I don't.
All right. Mr. Montoya, you had limited time to answer my question about the retirement numbers at HUD and the difficulties in recruiting new employees, particularly at higher levels for these jobs. It seems to me, just on the face of it, that the problem is rather different from what we've heard described at DOT, where you can identify particular categories of employees who where the numbers are low, alarmingly low, and the reasons for that, and the mitigating training programs and other things that might be undertaken. With HUD, it seems to be a more generalized problem. First of all, is that true? And how would you assess that? Are we talking here about public service somehow being degraded, devalued, less attractive than it's been for the kind of people who we need to attract than other comparable jobs? Are there pay issues here that help account for this? I want to give you a chance to explain what you described, in other words.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the follow-up question, Mr. Price. I think it starts with a number of things. One, I think the human capital Ochiko section of the department has struggled for many years to sort of get this right, how best to hire, how quick to hire. I don't believe it's an issue of people not wanting to come to government service. I personally think that HUD is a noble mission. When you think of the fact that their mission is to help care and tend for those who are less fortunate than us, I think it's a noble mission. I don't believe it's that. I think it's just a lack of any urgency, quite frankly, in particular areas. I think in others, it is a financial consideration, like Ginnie Mae, as I spoke to earlier. You know, I want to clarify something I said earlier when I said the CIO office, the Chief Information Office, is lacking a lot of highly skilled sets. The correction I want to make is it was the Chief Financial Officer's office who is lacking 11 key positions. So they all seem to be lacking quite a few numbers of key positions, which I don't think is a pay issue because it's, you know, everyone else is sort of fighting for the same positions. I think it's just a lack of any urgency to get these positions filled.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Mr. Jolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the comments from my colleague from North Carolina, certainly my friend Henry. And look, I realize it's not a comfortable conversation, but for the record, you have not looked into that decision. And this is not whether or not it was affiliated by party. This was whether or not a secretary should have recused himself from the largest single state Tiger Grant Award. His words, his quote. The president and I are giving this region $25 million. So clearly the secretary prioritized the grant to Charlotte in a way that raises questions of the oversight authority of this body and frankly this subcommittee. The Charlotte Observer, the day that he made the announcement, said, despite the $25 million, the project remains in limbo. We are still uncertain where the matching money will come from. We are still uncertain what the amount is. Now, the Tiger Grant applications I've seen, one of the predicates is ensuring that there's a local sponsor that has the funds necessary to match the federal award. But even that was uncertain. So the question I ask is not party related. I appreciate you clarifying that past secretaries have done that. I appreciate that. It is that this was the largest single state award to the mayor's home city, where the reports were that they were unsure where the matching money was going to come from, and the project itself, the week it was announced, was termed to be in limbo. It is appropriate for this subcommittee to ask those questions. It is an uncomfortable conversation. But to the extent that your office continues or is contemplating future study into the Tiger Grant Award process, I think it is relevant, certainly in the opinion of this member, and certainly given that the decision to award had not been granted in the past to Charlotte, but was granted in what is essentially the Secretary's last year in this administration on his way out the door. So I appreciate and respectfully the difference of how we see this issue. But I do think we have a responsibility on this subcommittee to ask the hard questions. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Quigley, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2014, an FAA contract employee deliberately started a fire that destroyed critical equipment at the FAA's Traffic Control Center in Aurora, Illinois. Thousands of flights were delayed or canceled at the cost of $350 million to the industry and the flying public, and it took weeks to get back to normal. As a result, obviously, we're still concerned about DOT's ability to protect against insider threats and the fact that it took so long to get back to normal. There wasn't an immediate transfer of certain responsibilities and tasks when this incident took place. So what have we learned, and how are we better equipped today to meet such a challenge?
Thanks, Mr. Quigley, and I appreciate your interest, certainly in that particular facility. I know you and your staff have read our critical facilities report, and the Chicago Tower, Chicago TRACON, the Chicago En route Air Traffic Control Center are all in or very close to your district, so you have a personal interest in it. FAA immediately undertook a review, as they should have, and laid out for themselves a series of steps in order to make their air traffic control system across the board, and not just at that one particular facility, but more redundant, more resilient, more flexible, and more survivable. The insider threat is among the most, if not particularly the most difficult threat in order to guard against. We could consult any agency, including right down at the bottom of the hill over at the Navy Yard, when a contractor in an incident somewhat similar to what happened at the Chicago facility used his ID card to get through the gate and into the building and kill a dozen people some years back. This employee at the Chicago facility had similar mayhem in mind, and in fact, had, even after he cut the cables and set the fire, took steps to try to kill himself on the scene too. We, I say we, I think probably the majority of Americans thought that FAA would have been better prepared in order to shift air traffic control responsibilities. Clearly, they could not, and it's been an eye-opening experience for all of us in the traveling public as well as for the agency, because although the agency, it would have been somewhat difficult, it would have been complicated, but at least we had been led to believe it would not have taken over 2 weeks. But for a host of reasons, FAA was not able to do that. Complications of airspace, of technology, having surpassed the backup systems that were already in place. The need, quite frankly, for air traffic controllers to be fully up to speed on the sections or sectors of the national airspace that they are responsible for. So it's not as easy as whistling in replacements from other parts of the country or shifting airspace responsibility to other sectors without the kind of detailed training that FAA requires its air traffic controllers to go through. It's a complicated problem. We are following FAA's, we're monitoring FAA's efforts to try to get it right this time and to keep pace with the problem, not to be overtaken as it was before.
Do you have some sense that there are concrete things that you can point to that we will do better in terms of shifting this if, heaven forbid, something like this were to happen again, intentional or not?
Right. I would, to give you a proper answer, sir, I would need to go back and consult with my staff. We would need to check with FAA, and we would be happy to do that.
Yeah.
It's a significant problem given the nature of insider threats at large and the vulnerabilities of air traffic control management for the national airspace.
Well, and this was an insider attack, but we live in a world where that may not always be the case. So I would appreciate if you get back to my office or share with the committee exactly where we are and what we still have to do to protect the traveling public. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Important questions. Mr. Cuellar.
Mr. Jolly, no discomfort. I just wanted to make sure that we don't give the impression that we're being partisan in asking those questions about saying that 63% of those dollars. I have no idea what Mr. LaHood did, and I just want to make sure that we follow the proper procedures on everything, and that's my question. So don't worry about me. But let me just say this, is that going into the strategic plan and performance measures, one of the problems I've had with agencies, and especially if you look at performance.gov, is that the agencies measure more the activity than the actual results. Could you, both of you tell us how those two agencies, Department of Transportation and HUD, are they measuring more activity than performance? Because the reason I'm saying that is because if we give them $1, but if we give them $1, I want to know what bang for the dollar am I getting for that $1. So Mr. Scovel and Mr. Montoya, tell us a little bit about what exactly, looking at their strategy, a strategic plan and their performance measure, are they measuring more activity or more results?
You want to go first?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, tough question, Mr. Cuellar. I appreciate it. As the committee well knows, the department, and specifically Federal Highways, has been tasked to institute a far more rigorous performance-based management system for the federal aid highway program. Federal Highways is in the process of doing that. They're nowhere near yet done. It's a complicated process in that it involves rulemaking, and I know the members of the committee have heard that before from others from the department, how complicated and how difficult it can be, the time required in order to follow the legal requirements to put a new rule in place. So that's one key area. I would say that if you're measuring activities versus performance, sure, that's a problem for DOT and probably looking across the board at most government agencies. It's what we collectively can measure and identify and hold up, whether it meets expectations as far as a measurement of performance or accomplishment or achievement or delivery to the Congress and to the taxpayer. It's a different question. When agencies like Federal Highways or the Federal Transit Administration open up grant programs and try to fund major infrastructure projects across the country, and I have in mind a couple in New York that are over budget and far over time, those kind of results are apparent too. Yeah, the project does get done in the end, but it's over budget, over time, and you hope it lives up to the specifications. A little bit different, I think, for an agency like the Federal Aviation Administration, which actually operates a system day in and day out, the air traffic control, air traffic management system, and all of us can see that in action. But the other long-standing projects that other agencies in the department are responsible for, much more difficult, and the department finds it much more difficult to present measurable performance achievements to the Congress and the public.
Bottom line, is it more activity or results?
More activity, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I mean, at least what I've seen on performance.gov, it's, thank you. Mr. Montoya?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Cornelius. The best example I can give you is the Moving to Work program that Congress has just recently authorized the department to expand by 100 public housing authorities. For the last 20 years, there have been 39, in essence, public housing authorities in the Moving to Work program, which allows for locally innovative new ways of performing housing and self-sufficiency and these sorts of things. The problem is in 20 years, they've never had a performance measure. And I don't think we've ever had one as an example of what exactly came from this program that basically has a lot less rules and a lot more flexibility to it. And yet the Congress has just expanded it. We have serious concerns that that's ever going to be successful. Quite frankly, out of the 39 Moving to Work housing authorities that have been in the program, we've investigated 5 of them under at least 23 different investigations for the abuse, the fraud, the mismanagement of that program because of the lack of oversight that the department has provided. So that's one example of more about the activity than performance and success.
My time is up, but Mr. Chairman, as you know, you did performance measures in Florida. I did performance measures in Texas, and I'm sure a lot of these members, if they were in the state legislature, they saw how those states were living laboratories for measures. You don't have to invent the new world, and it's, I wish we would follow more what the states are doing on the measurements. But members and David and everybody, if you want to just look at government.gov, I mean the performance.gov, and you see some of the measures there, it's amazing. I'll just leave it. And some agencies are doing better than other ones, but just wanted to just ask you to just take a look, and you'll be surprised at some of the measures. It's all mainly their most activity, measuring activity than results.
When you say surprised, you're saying in a good way or not in a good way? Just to clarify, not in a good way. All right. Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for your testimony today. I apologize I wasn't here for the totality of it. There's another hearing going on that I'm engaged in at the same time. But if I apologize if I ask a question that has already been addressed, and you can point that out if you'd like. I have a question for Mr. Scovel regarding the Federal Aviation Administration's action to address recent outages in the en route automation modernization system, the ERAM. I guess the FAA declared ERAM fully operational at all 20 en route air traffic control facilities in 2015. But since then, the $2.7 billion system has experienced a number of outages, most recently at the Washington Center in August of 2015, that resulted in delays and cancellation of hundreds of flights, affecting thousands of passengers, according to the office's announcement, which said an audit will begin then within a few weeks. So I understand there's an audit going on, and that ERAM is a program that replaced aging air traffic control hardware and software at facilities that manage high-altitude aviation traffic. But it's expected to provide the infrastructure for a range of new capabilities associated with NextGen. So I want to know, are we ready for that? What's the audit showing about the current complications we're having, and what can I tell folks back home?
All right. Thanks, Mr. Yoder. Great question. ERAM is absolutely essential to the success of NextGen. It's a foundational program. It's what the controllers call their automation tool, so that they can actually separate aircraft, high-altitude, long-distance aircraft, safely. It has to mesh with a number of other systems in order for the entire air traffic management system to function properly. Our audit is ongoing. I can't tell you what the amount of time, because if we were to point to a poster child, if you will, within FAA for an acquisition program that was misconceived and mismanaged virtually from the start, it would be ERAM. It's struggled under a cloud from its inception. We've identified 4 or 5 signal concerns with FAA's major acquisition projects, some of them dating back to the 90s. The agency had made efforts to, it seemed that the old skeletons came back out of the closet, everything from overly ambitious plans to unstable requirements, and that would probably be the most significant one. An inability for the tech center in New Jersey to fully test the system before it was accepted by the government from the contractor. So the government ended up accepting the program without having thoroughly tested it. Incentive fees, $150 million when the program was running more than 4 years overtime. $450 to almost $500 million total cost overrun. Unrealistic cost and schedule estimates. A system that had been promised to have been rolled out within a year or two ended up taking 4 or 5 years. So it's as I said, it's been a signal problem effort for the agency, but it's one that they absolutely must get right, because without it, NextGen doesn't stand a chance, and there's nothing else.
When do you expect your audit to be complete?
Midsummer to fall. I'll check with the audit team, and if I may get back to you, sir.
Yeah, that'd be fine. And would you expect that there would be recommendations that Congress would need to take up in order to resuscitate or resolve many of these concerns that you've raised?
Perhaps, but not necessarily. I don't want to whet your appetite or the Congress's appetite. Our recommendations, as they typically are keyed to the agency. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I would invite this committee's continuing strong oversight as the Congress has never failed to exercise when it comes to FAA matters. So
well, it sounds like
we'll certainly be looking for that kind of help.
So it sounds like this is an example of mismanagement in a way that not only do we need to spend our time boiling this down to find out where mistakes were made, how they can be corrected, but how we can use this as an example to ensure that this type of result doesn't happen again.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yoder. They've called votes, so unfortunately we will not have time for another round. So let me just take this opportunity to thank both of you and your staffs. I think these hearings are the most important hearings that we do, and I think your work is exceptionally invaluable and important. And I just hope that please feel free to contact us directly on any other issues. Please, because again, there's nothing more important than when you all do. And so again, thank both Inspector General, Mr. Scovel, and Mr. Montoya, along with your staff, for, again, your participation and your forthright answers. The committee staff will be in contact with both your budget offices regarding the questions for the record. I know that I have a number of questions to submit, and I can tell you that I think a lot of other members will have them as well. If you would please work with OMB to...
And I just want to add my thanks as well for the forthrightness of the testimony we've heard today. We'll find it very useful, and it's a good idea to have these two appear together because we get some sense of comparison of how agencies operate, which is always useful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Price. Thank the members of the subcommittee. And as you can tell, gentlemen, there's a lot of interest. And so let's stay in touch, and we look forward to continue working with you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, at this time now, we will adjourn the subcommittee. Thank you very much.